In today's bonus episode, I chat with Emma Jacobs, work and careers writer for the FT. Having previously co-authored the satirical column Work Tribes, Emma creates features with a particular focus on work, changes in the workplace and office life. I chat to Emma about her own experience of part-time working, how she sees the changes around flexible working playing out, what she makes of the 4-day week trials, and her hopes of how part-time work would evolve in the future.
I work part-time. I work 4 days a week. And that actually, I went back after I had my son full-time. And then as he started school, I went 4.5 days a week. And then I progressed to 4 days a week. But also, I felt that I wanted to pick my son up from school and just have a bit more flexibility when he went to school. And I mean, now he's at secondary school, so it's not the same. But I've been thinking whether I want to go back full time, and I don't think I do.
Is that because the space, that extra day, allows you?
Yeah, and also I've been doing kind of my own writing that kind of, I don't know what it will amount to, but it's something that I've been keeping office hours in school time. Well, you know, it's not that he wants to talk to me when he comes back from school, but I've been trying to work on my own stuff outside of my normal job. But that's what I want to carry on doing for the moment.
Yeah. And that links to what we heard in the last discussion from Katie and Richard, who are kind of big thinkers that have made a lot of impact in their fields, but felt that part-time working has been a key part of their success. So what do you think we can learn from stories like that?
Yeah, I thought that they had very different stories to each other. And him in particular, Richard, I thought was interesting because he didn't have a kind of caring responsibility. I mean, outside his job, it was something that he wanted to devote his own time to. And it kind of made him more aware of other people's demands, I guess, and the kind of other people's stresses and strains, whereas Katie's was more traditional. I think it made both of them very understanding as managers.
Yes, and I think we've heard from other stories in this series that sometimes it's when you're not at work you get your best ideas. So having those chances to do something creative, get outside, you know, perhaps where people do their best work, so to speak.
It is actually, and in those sorts of jobs it's quite intensive, and so you kind of, I don't want to overstate it. I mean, I am not in an emergency room or anything like that, but you know, it can be quite stressful. And then that in a normal weekend, you're kind of transitioning on a Saturday, but actually having a kind of transition on a Friday, which is when I have my day off, is really helpful. You get much more clear-headed. And as you say, you can think a lot more. And I keep kind of a running list of ideas, and often I'm having them at the weekend when I'm not working.
Across these series, we've heard quite positive stories of part-time working across the show. Do you think employers are more understanding these days about part-time?
I think they have to think about it more. I think that there are a lot of, particularly around women, I think they're trying to think much more about how do we nurture talent and how do we make sure that we can attract women and maintain them in the workforce, but also kind of groom them for leadership roles or kind of success later. So there is a kind of awareness around part-time being part of a kind of life cycle, a career cycle. But I think there is much more awareness, but I think it is still a very tricky area, and I don't think that employers manage it very well. I've spoken to lots of part-time workers, as you will have done, who are doing lots of unpaid work. I know from media organisations that a lot of my peers think, actually, I'm working on the 5th day. Why am I doing all this work for free? And they often end up going full-time again. I think it is hard to manage other people. I think that if you're working full-time and you see somebody working part-time, you think, why are they being given the same opportunities as me? That there can be a resentment.
Yeah, that team dynamic's been mentioned in one of the stories we've heard in this series. Again, that sometimes the resistance isn't from the manager, but from the peers who are kind of sensing this unfairness by that person not being around. And I think you're right, it's perhaps work. People still chunk work in 5-day blocks. There's quite a traditional view of that's what work is. So, how can we get employers to think differently about how jobs are designed, particularly when the world isn't 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and lots of jobs don't need to be? So why do we still think of things quite traditionally like that?
I think there is a resistance. I mean, when we've seen the kind of return to the office, there is a resistance in terms of, everyone thought during the pandemic, me and Mongan, that everyone was going to have this great epiphany and things were never going to go back to normal. And to some extent, they haven't. I think there is much more flexibility in the way that employers think. But I think that we still do think very much in these kind of rigid days. Nobody ever has a realistic conversation, I think, really. I mean, the good employers do, but I think lots of people don't. They don't say, what would this look like, spread around fewer hours? And they don't say, what would a good outcome be for your workload? What can I mark you against? What can I say that you've achieved that's a success in terms of the job?
Yeah, agree. And I think it's all too often, just take the full-time job and squash it and make it work, and it's left up to the individual to make it work. Whereas, as you say, hopefully in more and more cases, there's a more direct conversation about workload and what adjustments could be made. But yeah, that's a new concept to some employers that we're trying to spread the word around.
I mean, there is a lot more flexibility in terms of So I guess the kind of working week, especially if you're working from home part of the week, say some caring responsibilities would be around school hours, which is, has been one form of part-time working, compressed hours, or kind of leaving early. But you don't have to do that so much now. You could log off between 3 and 5 and log back on later. Are you seeing kind of any diminished interest in part-time work?
Yeah, the numbers have remained fairly steady, but you're right. There are straight after lockdown and COVID, there was a slight decline in people working part-time. And I think it was because greater flexibility to do a school run, to make up hours at the weekend or whatever was there. And people got used to working that way. And of course, we've had a financial cost of living crisis that have meant some families have had to both work full-time to make ends meet. So yes, I think greater flexibility has helped, but not diminished the demand altogether for part-time work. And we know people want part-time work for a variety of reasons, not just the childcare one, but, as they move into later life, for health conditions, and increasingly younger workers as well, for various reasons, whether it's their own well-being, mental health, or because they've got a side hustle outside of work that they're pursuing, or, I think a different attitude towards what work looks like.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So do you think, given we have longer working lives, this issue about who's associated with part-time working, currently over 6 million of the 8 million part-time workers are women, do you think that will change over time?
I guess better paternity leave is helping shift some of this kind of dynamic. It is a hard one to shift, though, especially in a lot of these kind of greedy jobs, or these kind of, certainly city companies that I talk to. They might take longer paternity leave, and that does help, but it's still there's still quite a lot of, working long hours is the best way to prove yourself and to show commitment to the company. But I agree. I think that younger people want more of a mix. They see that the kind of contract of their parents between employer and employee, you don't necessarily get a great return for what you put into it. So, they want to make their working lives work for them to some degree. That is something that Gen Z are interested in. I think that if we need to get part-time working right, because we need to get it right for moving into retirement, because, people are going to work longer. They don't want to work in the same roles. They don't want to work at the same pace necessarily, although lots of people do. And also they just haven't got the savings to jump into retirement. I think that there isn't enough thinking about older people and part-time working. And by older people, I guess I mean 60 plus.
One area that has triggered a lot of interest over the last couple of years have been things like the 4-day week trials and kind of experiments in working less. I wondered what any thoughts about those trials, and one of my colleagues wonders if 4-day week is a sort of rebrand of part-time with a more acceptable face, because it doesn't have some of the connotations that part-time has with kind of working mothers and so on.
I think I think it is. I did do quite a lot of reporting on companies that had done the trial of a 4-day week, and I thought it was very interesting. And I don't think it is the future, however much people shout about it. I hope it, it'd be nice if more people did it. It'd be nice if more employers thought about it. And it is a good way to kind of get some of the kind of gender parity up to measure by making it kind of less stigmatized, showing men that it's, nice to have a day off, or, you can see your family or do that hobby that you've always wanted to do. I think that it is a lot of work. And also, it's not really been done at a mass scale. None of these kind of big employers, the likes of Unilever or Microsoft have done them in small territories. I don't think Microsoft's lasted. That was done in Japan. The Unilever one's been done in New Zealand, but it hasn't been rolled out elsewhere, I don't think. It was interesting talking to people that had been part-time before, who had been joined by the rest of the company on that day off. So I spoke to somebody who was head of HR at one company, and she said that she had really enjoyed everybody else coming up to 4 days a week, because it meant that she wasn't getting a backlog of emails to attend to. No one was sort of tagging her into a meeting by accident. It just meant that everybody had a break, and she knew that time was free for her. So that was interesting. Also, she got a pay bump because everybody else was now on a kind of, it's not a compressed week, but the workload is compressed, I guess. And I think that possibly the experiment has shown, I don't think people are listening sort of carefully enough to how much work goes into doing these trials, or and that there's a lot of preparation that needs to take place. And I guess my kind of take home for the part-time community, if that's the thing, actually we should be preparing for part-time roles with a bit more respect and a bit more understanding of what a shift will be.
That's an excellent point. Yes, I agree, because you have to be so thoughtful to make sure you can do 100% of the output and 80% of the time, and that sense of prioritization and discussions about what really matters is often what part-timers feel they haven't had that clarity on what really matters and what they can drop. I mean, we love watching these experiments because at least it's organizations listening to staff demand for better working hours, and the chance to just experiment and try and learn, even if they don't then fully adopt it for the long term. That's there's value in trialing.
It's such an undertaking that it's very hard to go back on. So I think that you have to think you're going to do it longer term. But I think that more people talk about different work patterns, the better.
So as we look ahead to the future, as you said, that there have been a lot of changes to flexible working more broadly over the last couple of years. But as we look ahead, what are your hopes for part-time work and part-time employment looking forward?
I guess part of my hopes are that people that don't actually need part-time work will have enough flexibility in their week, that employers can be flexible enough that they don't have to take half a day if they want to pick their child up from school, or take their mum to a doctor's appointment. And so, I like working 4 days a week. I think it's got a lot of benefits. The financial hit is hard. I think that, it would be great if people didn't have to go part-time, if they had some flexibility in their week, but also that people really took part-time work seriously and sort of tried to give people appraisals based on the amount of work they can do properly, and to organise it in advance. So I guess that is one hope, but also, I guess, thinking more thoughtfully, not just about people with care responsibilities at the beginning of their family lives, but also for, aging relatives, or also aging themselves, and how they're going to kind of transition to retirement, really. I think that is a big piece that not enough conversations are happening about it.
It was really interesting to hear Emma's perspective on some of the themes we've explored through these podcasts. Clearly a fan of flexibility in general, she makes the case for a world where it's understood that people need space in their working lives for their outside work commitments, where employers understand that the trust and flex they give will be repaid in return. It's been inspiring through this series to hear from people who've decided to work less, whatever the reason, and by and large have been supported to do this and progress their careers. I hope their experiences help you feel confident to forge the part-time path which works for you. My thanks go to Phoenix Insights for helping Timewise create this series, and to all the people who've put themselves forward and told their stories. Our aim in sharing them is to normalise different working patterns and demonstrate practically how it's done. We'll continue to work with employers to open up more part-time and flexible opportunities, because we believe no one should have to compromise their worth because they want to work less than full-time. Part-time works.